Now, to help me go through the top stories this week, I'm joined by Laura Pomfret. She is the founder of a female-focused financial Instagram page, Financial, and we are going to talk through a number of big stories this week. The kind of ever-increasing decline of cash, potential support to ban gambling. We've got the latest increase to the inflation rate, and just what impact Cristiano Ronaldo moving those bottles of Coke had on Coca-Cola's share price. Hope you enjoy. Laura, thank you so much for coming on to Cash Chats and to the Your Money this week. Look back at some of the big financial stories from the last 7 days. As ever, so much for us to talk about. So let's just jump straight into it. And the first one is a really interesting one. And it's, as you'd expect right now, so many of these stories have been sort of brought about because of the pandemic the last sort of 18 months or so. But it's about how we are getting closer and closer to a cashless society.
It's something that's been coming a while, hasn't it, Andy? And I just think that the pandemic has accelerated it. Do you know what concerns me? So there's this word friction that I always think about when I think about cashless. So the people that have done traditional money management, cash envelopes, savings in a jar, it's all very like hands-on. It takes effort. And my concern with the way that the society was going so cashless pre-pandemic was the removal of friction from the purchase process. So I guess another example of that is Amazon remembering your numbers and saying, is it pay with one click or something?
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. All those kind of quick baskets where you just don't have to think at all. The purchase just happens. And contactless is a perfect example of that as well, isn't it? You just tap your card and it's happened. You haven't even necessarily appreciated what the amount that you're being charged is, particularly about you in bars and stuff. The amount of time people, remember when we used to do that, go to bars and order at the bar. But you didn't even know what the price was sometimes. You just tap your card and take your drinks back to your friends or table. You're right. It does take that friction out. It's a big thing.
Well, I saw my friend the other day bought coffee with his face because it was face recognition pay, which freaked me out completely. I don't know why he needed to use it. Oh, maybe it was to unlock his phone. No, maybe you can pay. It freaked me out. He paid for our coffee with his face, and that's like sci-fi stuff. But I really appreciated it during the pandemic for hygiene reasons that we weren't handling cash, and so that's fine. But we do have to be mindful of this removal of friction. It is so easy for us to buy things now. We're not even looking at the amount on the screen because we're not having to type in our PIN codes or sign. You remember when you used to have to sign? You used to have to sign. But actually, I think what could we do to kind of counter it? And I'm a fan of Starling. Some people use Monzo. Any kind of app that has these spaces, I think, is a really good way of at least managing your money and limiting this concept that you don't just have everything sloshing around in one current account, that it's all in different buckets. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so this is, the reports show that a quarter of all transactions are now contactless, but only 1 in 6 are with coins and notes. It's a 35% drop in cash transactions during that first year of the pandemic. So it's a big change, but it really was on its way in so many ways. Personally, I'd love to have a digital wallet, not even have an actual physical wallet with cards. I'd like to go completely digital, which would be great in lots of ways. But you do, as you say, there are things where people miss out. And one of those things is budgeting. People using cash as a budgeting technique. It helps them keep on track of what they're doing. And they hold, like you said, the old envelope kind of system. And you're bang on right there. Digital apps like Starling and Monzo with their pots and spaces, or Hyperjar, which actually has little jars you can break stuff in, can still bring that. So it's not like that we lose that completely. You can just find new ways to adapt some of those techniques. So again, it's not necessarily a bad thing in that sense. But you do have to think about, generally it's kind of people who are older, and maybe sometimes people who are from sort of poorer backgrounds as well, who don't have the access to the technology. So we can say that, yes, you can move all this stuff online and do all these things instead. Doesn't really matter. But if they don't have access to the latest smartphone or don't have the confidence with the internet and things, then they're going to be the ones who miss out on this.
They'll get left behind. I mean, there's a thing about financial literacy as well. So it's all well and good, you and I who work on money platforms and help people to do better with money, saying, oh, you can use your pots. But someone who literally has no interest in looking after their money in that way, and that's fine, is going to be really impacted by not having that tension. The other thing is also children. So there's some really good, obviously, is it Go Henry is a really good
another one,
card which helps support children learning, and it has to be a card because, you know, my daughter during the pandemic, our local newsagent did allow cash, and, you know, she was allowed 50p every day when we do our walk that you're allowed to do. At the end of it was a newsagent's, and she'd get something with money, and that was her learning, you know, about that. But the more we move to digital, we're going to have to really up our financial literacy. The last thing as well, actually, charities rely on cash donations lots of time. So, and also tips in restaurants. I know we've not seen many of those, but being able to donate money into a charity box is a real, you know, we're missing out on that. At the moment, though, I came across a new product, I guess it is a fintech called Goodbox. I think they're called Goodbox. Two females, they're in the north, they're in Manchester, have set up a contactless charity donation, and it's like a little box that can go in a shop, and it goes on the till, and you can tap for donations. And they've kind of spotted this issue that charities are losing out on donations because people don't have cash anymore. So maybe we should I need to have a good look at them and make sure that's Goodbox.
Well, you know, if you're out and about and you see a big issue seller as well, ask them, because a lot of them have contactless readers now. You know, it's not just about having to have the coins on you. You can tap, and the way they've kind of set it up as well, that the fees that most retailers will get aren't going to massively impact them. And I didn't do it last year, but I was sort of a volunteer locally, run the big sort of charity bonfire here. And so this would be 2019's bonfire day, bonfire night. And I had a bucket and I had a card reader. And it was interesting, that kind of thing. We said, look, you know, I've got no change, mate, I've got no change. When you say it doesn't matter, I can take it on card. I mean, appreciate there's a trust element there as well. Some people aren't necessarily confident that who is this bloke just because he's got a bucket and a lanyard? Does he really, is he a con man or not? But you can do it. And I think a lot more charities are getting wise to that because they've had to, because it was one of those essential ways to raise the funds that they often needed. I mean,
absolutely,
it's been accelerated because of the pandemic. Lots of shops, as you say, very few of them at least actually accepting cash, generally for hygiene reasons, both small ones and some really large chains as well. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them stick like that. But maybe we'll see as we get out more and go to these places which do accept cash, maybe it will creep back a little bit. So maybe this massive increase we've seen over the last sort of 12 months or so will roll back slightly. But I still think this is happening, whether we like it or not. And again, it's probably a conversation for another time, is that kind of to ensure, while people do need access to cash, that the government does do something to ensure they have that. But there's meant to be stuff going on. I guess we need to make sure that it does come 100%, about.
100%. One to keep an eye on. It's gone a lot quicker than any of us could have imagined. And so, like I said, I think we need the infrastructure in place and the support in place for those people, that they don't get left behind.
So the next story is one that rears its head every month, but it's always worth talking about it every month. And it's the latest inflation rate. It is now up to a huge 2.1% for May. It was 1.5% in April, and that in itself was more than double the 0.7% we had the month before that. And for actually most of the pandemic, it's been around that kind of, you know, that sort of middle of between a half and a give or take a little bit. But this is a big jump up, and this is bigger than most of economists were expecting. What does this mean?
So for me, I think I'm a big believer in trends and looking at longer trends, not at month on month. And let's have a little think about commerce in the past 12 months. None of us knew what we were doing. The companies didn't know what they were doing. Logistics were crazy. Shops were shut. Shops were open. Companies that thought they were going to really struggle pivoted and then suddenly did really, really well. And so I think if you think about industry, that no one could use proper projections. No one knew how to price properly. So you've had, you know, loads of big brand names taking furlough money, then absolutely flying and having to, you know, give it back morally and probably practically as well. And so if you think about what drives inflation, it's prices, and market's gone crazy because of that. And so I'm not surprised that it's starting to come up again, especially as things were opening up. It's something that many of us think it's good to keep an eye on, but really, if we are quite financially well, if we focus on the basics, like making sure that our budgets aren't too tight so that we've got room to move, so that we can handle these rises, keeping an eye on income, making sure that if you need a pay rise because things have gone up 2%, or blended across the year. Also things like keeping an eye on rates. Like I'm not sure whether interest rates rising panics you or not. For me, it's more making sure that people haven't over borrowed, and you just adjust and you just pivot as you see it. Is it something you're worried about?
I think it's one of those things that you say that there's so much uncertainty right now in terms of this doesn't really necessarily mean anything just because we've seen two quite sharp increases month on month. Because if we do go back 12 and 13 months when they're measuring the prices against, there was, as you say, that sudden change. So one of the big drivers for inflation this month is petrol.
Up 17. Find that weird. Is that what do you think? I mean, is that us opening up here?
Well, 17.9% up on a year ago. But you've got to remember that in May last year, petrol prices were really, 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 really low, partly as a result of the pandemic and people not moving around, not filling up their pumps. There was a lot more petrol available, so you reduced the prices to get people filling up. And then we're back at it, and other things obviously go on around the world. It's not purely about that, but that's why there's such a massive difference 12 months on, because 12 months ago in itself was particularly exceptional. So it's more when you're comparing 12 months of very similar conditions, do you get a real reflection of what's happening. So yes, do you know what? If you're filling up a car, and we did it the other day, again, haven't been driving a lot, filled it up, I'm like, God, that's like expensive to do, the whole tank. Then you're going to feel that. You really are. Other things, clothes have gone up. That's the other kind of big driver again, up 2.3%, and they were up last month as well. And in part, I think that is because those stores have been struggling, and they're obviously trying to get as much of the money as they can. So maybe discounting less, but also there are other things going on worldwide, like the shipping costs, whether that's partly down to Brexit, partly down to the pandemic, partly possibly, if not felt now, down to when that big tanker got stuck and delayed all those boats in the Suez Canal. So all those things will come into play, but those are quite big jumps, right? Other things have come down. So it's not necessarily going to affect us individually by that amount. It depends how you're doing things, and it will continue to change. We're not economists, right? They don't always know what's going on. They don't always get it right. So again, I don't think it's something to panic about, but I think it is important to keep across it and be aware of it. And particularly, say, my scared of interest rates going up. I'm not too worried about it. I think as a saver, it will be great news if base rates do go up, and then that is potentially, hopefully, reflected in savings accounts. Although economists are saying it's unlikely to happen. They don't think it's going to happen for at least until late next year. They're saying, which seems ridiculous. But again, a long, long time before any sort of substantial stuff happens. Probably not going to affect most people's borrowing too much. The only thing really would be mortgages. And if you are remortgaging now or getting your first mortgage, it's a good time to get it because things are so low. And if it's fixed in, you're fixed in at that rate. If you're in a variable rate, then you obviously need to be careful that you, as you said there, you have room in your budget for potentially your payments jumping up a huge amount, and just generally a bit of space for things getting more expensive. So again, not too worried about it, but I think it's worth bearing it in mind. And if you can, although now there's only one savings account pretty much that will beat the rate of inflation for this month. And you can only put 50 quid a month into that. So most of your savings are going to be losing out in real terms.
I was just going to say, it's a real reminder that money sat doing nothing is going backwards. And you have to be financially stable. You have to have room in your budget. You have to, we shouldn't be too worried if you've not borrowed at a stupid level, then you'll be able to move. What do we say? Something like up to 25% of your outgoing should be your home costs and no more, because it gives you room to move. The interesting thing for me is, if anyone listening to this is not sure about inflation and what it means for them, it means that their £2 in the bank is not £2 next year. It's actually less than that because of inflation. So when we're thinking about investing and growing, we need to be beating 2% to just make that money worth the same. And that's a real message that we have people in our community who are just savers. Save. But the idea of investing scares them. And it's like, oh, you'll get there. Build up your bridge, build up your strong foundations. And then with extra money that you can afford to think, I don't need to bank on it, you can invest it. Because if you don't, the alternative is it going backwards because of the inflation.
Yeah, and it's really, just to finish on this one, it's a really good point there as well. Some people might be thinking, well, what is the point of me having money in savings if only one account is beating that rate? If all of them are now below inflation, it's losing money. What's the point? I may as well put it all into investing. And I think it's what you said there is really key. That is once you've actually got that savings base set up. Yes, unfortunately, right now, those interest rates you're going to get on that savings, get as best as you can, get the highest you possibly can to mitigate those losses this month. We don't know what happened next month. Could be going on for a while. But you want to have, again, 3 to 6 months is a general kind of rule of thumb for your emergency savings of your kind of essential expenses. If you've got that and whatever you're comfortable with, you might feel comfortable with less, you might want to have more. Then look at investing, and then hopefully you will be able to kind of, be beating that rate of inflation. But it's certainly not a kind of a warning to people to move everything out of cash into investments, because if that was the drop, and that, again, I'm not an expert on these things, but potentially inflation could impact the markets in the short or longer term, and you need that money in a month, a year, whatever it is, then you might actually have lost even more potentially. So it's important one to think about long term.
I like the fact that the inflation is the cost of patience and security. So I don't mind we like a chunky emergency fund. We're quite risk averse. And so I don't mind it not growing and sometimes potentially going backward because of inflation by having it there. It just means anything else I want to go up to try and counter that cost.
Right, so let's sticking with sort of the impact of the pandemic, as so many of these things do. But we know, obviously, we were meant to have on Monday was meant to be Freedom Day. I hate that term, but Freedom Day, as it's been coined by everyone now. We know it's been put back by 4 weeks now, so it's now going to be the 19th of July, I want to say. And that obviously has a huge impact on a number of industries, particularly the hospitality, entertainment, sport, theatre, travel, all these people, massive setback to them. One of the things that people were hoping might happen involves furlough. We know that right now that is due to start tapering off from the 1st of July. At the moment, the government will pay 80% of people on furlough, 80% of their salary up to obviously a fixed amount every single month. From the 1st of July, the plan is for that to drop down to 70% and the employer to put in 10% of a contribution. And then from August, that contribution from the employer will be 20%, the government 60% before it finally ends in September. And there has been hope that potentially that tapering off would be paused or postponed. The Independent has reported that the Treasury is considering that happening, keeping it at 80% from the government. This was a few days ago, but not seen or heard anything more from this right now. So again, it's going to be really, really worrying for so many of those people who had hoped to be sort of getting back into the swing of things now.
Exactly. And I think that the measures really do have to go hand in hand. I think, the right hand has to talk to the left and they need to be putting in these measures together. When furlough came about this time last year, I used to work in the travel industry in quite a senior role, and a lot of people in the travel industry were either being made redundant or were having talks about it. It was in all the press because literally everything stopped overnight, and then it was for the foreseeable. And then suddenly this scheme came about, which meant actually we can hold on and see what happens. And I'm so privileged to have been around when that was there, because people who were going to lose jobs didn't. And or if they were going to in the end anyway, and across the industries most heavily affected, it was prolonged. So that furlough has been a wonderful scheme. A lot of people, it's polarizing. A lot of people have differing views on it, but the net effect on our economy is if we didn't pay that, we were going to have to probably ramp up universal credit payments and support payments and benefit payments. And so it's just doing it a different way around and keeping people employed. Back to the point we made on inflation and industries not knowing what's going to happen. Yeah. A lot of people actually pivoted and did really well. And so handed that furlough money back and suddenly realised it was lovely to have as a safety net. We don't need it. I think when we're coming forward now, what I would just hope is that the Treasury take this balanced view that it's not just an income stream for companies that are doing fine. I think the Irish are more strict. I've got a friend who's the CFO with a business over there, and they were saying that they're much more strict on whether you can and can't claim. I think it's if you posted a profit. Or no, it's not if you posted a profit. It's if you were similar within 5% of your performance last year, you have to give the money back. And that's it's just quite black and white. They're literally no messing, just it is or it isn't. Now, I'm not an expert on it, so I can't comment, but it made me think, I hope we're doing good in our diligence. And so that the companies that really need it, especially those that are seasonal, and so they're going to maybe miss a season, and can we get these companies and these people still in secure jobs until next year? It's a great initiative, but it has to be policed.
Yeah, and you mentioned there people returning. More than £1 billion has been returned by companies who've recovered faster than expected. So they took the initial furlough money and now returned it. And I mean, you could argue, well, there's some extra money you can put into changing the rules slightly for the next few months to help those particularly at-risk industries, although it's still going to be paid back at some point. So it's tough. And I really, really feel for anyone who works in those industries, not just people who run the businesses who could potentially see it all collapse, but then you're losing your job at this time. Really, really sort of scary thing to be thinking about. And particularly, I mean, we haven't got time to go into this detail, but there was another story this week about how older workers, if they've been furloughed and subsequently then lose their job, are going to be much, much harder for them to find new employment. So again, there could well be a particularly sort of like an additional crisis. There's so many crises we've got when you get sort of social care at an older age, but even more in terms of people not having the money to kind of get them through. We already know the expectation that we're going to work longer anyway, but if you can't get a job because of what's been going on, it's going to make things particularly tough. Let's move on now to another story, completely sort of different now, sort of handbrake turn, but this is one about online dating fraud, up 40% during the last year. This is a really interesting one, isn't it? I mean, £73.9 million has been lost in this way during the pandemic. And could be even higher as people embarrassed to report that essentially they've been catfished, they've been groomed online by someone saying that they are in love with them or want to be with them and then trying to get their money. It's a scary thing to be going on, isn't it?
It's so sad, Andy. And I think it's a social result of the situations that people have found themselves in. A few things, screen time's gone up, alcohol consumption's gone up apparently in the UK. We're the worst in Europe for it, which doesn't surprise me. But this is something that people have taken advantage of, opportunities where people are isolated and connected to their phones. And so it's really, really sad. And to be honest, it's hard to think, how do we fix it? It could just be, as burglaries and robberies went down and violent crime went down, people's attentions were switched and they took advantage of a different thing. I do think we've had lots of people message us to say, I was a victim of this, when we've mentioned it before. And we've actually mentioned just money in relationships, and it starts to come out of where people believe they've been in a relationship and shared money. And I think it's one of those situations where people confess privately and say, can I tell you this? I want to know that other people won't go through it. And it's so sad. And it makes you really want to promote certain basic hygiene factors when it comes to money about, we have a principle, until your finances are not combined, until you're fully ready for that, whether that's married or whether it's been together years. I don't support anyone in our community lending money to new partners or even friends, mainly because it just spoils the relationship. It's really, really difficult. The minute you lend someone money or borrow money, everyone's a bit more uncomfortable. And so if it can be avoided, it's much better. So you find it really hard that's established relationships. And then what we're finding is these relationships where people have never even met. People have been taken advantage of. It's awful.
It really is. I think some of the sort of telltale signs, if this is happening to you, or perhaps it's a friend or family member who's told you about someone they've met online. I mean, it sounds like the key sort of warning signs are, as you say, they've never met them, but also they've not even had necessarily a video chat. This day and age, one of the good things of the last 18 months has been how all of us now pretty much know how to do Zoom or whatever kind of other chat it is. But they've not even had that. They may not even have had a phone conversation, but a phone conversation doesn't necessarily mean they are who they say they are, because they can fake the photo and the image and stuff. So if you've got anyone who's in that kind of scenario and this is going on for a while, this is a report by Which magazine, I should say. Often there's excuses such as they've got a job offshore, or they're in the armed forces, or something like that. So there's a reason why they can't meet up, or a reason why they might not be able to have, the signal quality to do a video chat or whatever it might be. They are kind of the telltale signs, and what they're doing, if they're kind of getting ingratiated to someone, if they, it is grooming. That's kind of really what it is. They'll then sort of come up with things like, I need some money for a visa, or for the flights to get home to see you, or I have suddenly got ill and they charge me over here, will you lend me the money? And people do blindly send that cash over. And I think it's, if you know anyone who's in a scenario, just talk to them about this. Even if they haven't had any requests for money yet, just sort of say, look, are you aware that this is a thing? I'm not saying that so-and-so isn't real, but just be really careful and don't send any money, because although sometimes they might be able to get it back from their banks, it's possible. This is one of those things where it's much, much, much harder, because the scam is so sort of sophisticated in the sense that you're trusting someone. You're not being. It's not necessarily a fault of the banks themselves for you to transfer the money over.
100%. I would say to anyone who ever gets asked to send someone money who they've never met, tell someone else first. Yeah. Even if you're just a bit not sure, tell your best mate. If you don't want to tell your best mate, I think you think there's something a little bit, or you may be a little bit embarrassed, but if someone genuinely needs money, there's other means of them getting it. I like to divide relationships and money until it's a very, very established, we're living together, we're paying for things together relationship. And even then we've had some really, really sad stories. So you can help them find money. You can help say, have you got anything to sell on eBay? If you need 500 quid, I can help you side hustle. But if you're not willing to tell someone else, it's probably a little bit fishy. And keeping relationships and money separate is your entitlement. It doesn't mean that you're not being caring and you're not being generous. So it's hopefully something that is becoming more and more prevalent in the press, that people are more aware of it and they recognize it when it's starting to happen. But fingers crossed, like you said, anyone that may be thinking they're going through that or someone else's, it's time to intervene. And even if everyone ends up looking stupid afterwards, at least we ask the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So important. Another story. It was just a short one. I very quickly want to touch on this one, but I don't know if you saw this video that went viral of, obviously the Euros have started. They're going for a week now. And Cristiano Ronaldo sitting down for a press conference, and he sits down and he sees 2 bottles of Coca-Cola, and he moves them away, takes them off screen, and lifts up a bottle of water and says, basically,
agua.
Water. Yeah, agua, yeah. And as a result, this snub has wiped billions off Coca-Cola's market value. Probably like a small drop, 1.6% on the share price. But obviously, it's a big company, so that has equated to a large amount. And it just sort of shows the power potentially that some individuals can have of not just a product you're investing, but just on us as in general. I thought it was a really, really interesting moment.
Honestly, I loved it. I've got a lot of time for Cristiano Ronaldo because I loved his documentary, which I need to try and find and watch again. My husband is a huge City fan, so it's a controversial topic in our house. I love his work ethic. I love his relationship with his children. There's lots that I'm not sure about, so I'm certainly not saying that I'm his number one fan, but he's very principled. And it just shows the impact that people can have. So Elon Musk, when he was messing around with Bitcoin, cryptocurrency markets, when he talked about whether Tesla were or were not accepting Bitcoin, I think it was, as a currency rather than crypto, and GameStop and Reddit was just amazing to show the impact that digital media can have and individuals. Because I think celebrities, because he's a celebrity, they've always been influential. People have been picking fun at him because he was Coca-Cola. He's had Coca-Cola deals in the past, actually. But what I think now is, he's at a point of trust, right? He knows that people look up to him, children look up to him, his own children look up to him. And hopefully it means that, in his wider life, he knows that people are following what he does. And that was just it was tiny. People think it was a big thing. He literally, like you said, moved the bottles, picked up water and went agua. Yeah. And suddenly billions have been dropped off. Will it impact sales, Andy? Because that's share price. But maybe it actually will, either it'll bounce back and it'll mean that people have had product placement even more so. It's actually bad. There's no such thing as bad publicity.
Yeah.
or Pepsi are going to come on the offensive. What do you reckon?
Well, that's it, because it wasn't like he was saying, like, drink Pepsi instead. It wasn't this kind of thing. It was very much a kind of, get rid of the carbonated drinks. I mean, I'd love to see if it was sort of impacted in sales in terms of the impact. We know there's been a lot of work about trying to remove advertising for junk food away from kids, and that will have an impact because you see it everywhere. You kind of, as a result, you're more likely to consume it. So it'd be lovely if that did happen. And actually that leads us nicely on to the last story. And this is around, I think, some great news. Questionable about whether anything will actually happen. We'll be done with it. But this is a survey from YouGov and the Royal Society for Public Health. They've surveyed 12,000 people, which is a very large sample. Most time you see a poll, it's only 2,000 people to be kind of statistically sort of relevant. So 12,000 people is a really, really good sample. And 77% of them support an advert on gambling, a gambling advert ban before 9 p.m. and sort of broader, big numbers also support broader advertising bans. So I think, that would be, I think, a fantastic thing if it could happen. And was football particularly, there was some pressure a few months ago, or the last month. I think it was Norwich had announced a new sponsor, which was a gambling firm, but I think it also had questionable sort of sexism connotations with the gambling firm. But they dropped them as an advertiser because of that. It does feel that people are kind of up for change and stuff, and I think with gambling, if we can do that, it'd be a good thing.
I think for so long people have been so passive in as a country anyway, but as a population, passive in advertising. So it just gets put out there and you consume it. And a few activists start to get together and talk about tobacco and how it's not very good for you, and actually how we promote it, and actually how it's something cool. And then it goes, actually, that's a bad thing. And it's happening probably a little bit too slowly for some things. The gambling industry were really damaged by the pandemic because there was no sporting happening. They were really, really struggling because there was nothing to gamble on. And so, they are going to come hard over the summer for any events that are on. Obviously, we've got the Euros at the moment. Anything else that they can get their hands on, new season starting, they're going to be ready for it. And I would welcome it. I think that from the female side, it's not the sports gambling, it's bingo, it's daytime TV targeting mums at home. I believe nothing good comes from gambling. I don't, but I'm quite principled in that, and that's a personal view. We as a family, wider family, bet on the Grand National. So obviously we're Northern, it's a big thing up here. You pick your favourite colour, whatever, you put a bet on. My nephew, who is 4, nearly 5, cried because he lost, like sobbed, couldn't believe that his horse didn't win. I think the jockey fell off, so it was probably a bit more emotive, and he wanted to go again. I want to bet again. I want to win. I want to win the next one. And we were like, well, no, like we did the thing where the bookies were shut because it was lockdown, so we had to like do it on the phone. It was like, you can just do it on the phone. And I was like, whoa, okay, that was us having a laugh. This is what the impact it can do to someone who isn't connected to it. So I just believe it's a good thing, and I think we should be more principled, because we focus on financial wellness, not wealth. Anything that's get rich quick, anything that's trying to accelerate more than's normal doesn't tend to sit well with us. What do you think? Do you think we should be limiting it and either removing it from our screens or pushing it really late?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you go back to sort of the 80s, maybe the 90s, but you turn on the snooker and it was tobacco firms everywhere.
Yeah.
Watch the football and the shirts were emblazoned with all these different brands.
I remember car racing, F1. Was it Marlboro used to be on
yes,
on the cars?
On the McLarens, wasn't it? Or well, whichever one it was. But yeah, absolutely. It was everywhere. And so actually we shouldn't be combining these things with that sort of broader advertising. And again, the junk food thing has come along. So it feels to me like hopefully there is some momentum to do the same with gambling. And, on the adverts, if you watch any sporting event and there's an advert and a gambling one pops up, it does say, when the fun stops, stop, or something like that. Doesn't make a difference. If you're in the zone, you're doing it, whether you're a 4-year-old or a 40-year-old or whoever it is who's into it, you're not going to pay attention to a little slogan. You need to remove that temptation, because there is so much of it, so many easy ways for people to get into it. I mean, we haven't got time to talk about it right now, but one of the things I particularly have an issue with is matched betting, where they give you some free money to match the bet. So you would get that essentially a free bet. And lots of people say, oh, you can't lose, it's great. But you can lose, because they wouldn't offer this kind of promotion if they weren't going to make money from some people down the line. So I really hope that this kind of public pressure is there. If there's a support for it, then hopefully it can kind of make some kind of bigger change. But obviously, they'll be lobbying hard, as you say, particularly because of the pandemic, the losses that they've made to battle that.
Let's be very clear about who they're targeting as well. So you might hear once in a while that wealthy individuals have gambling problems, footballers, it's usually in the press, but bankers, people with a lot of money once in a while have a problem. They're not targeting them. They're targeting the people that aren't in jobs at the moment. They're targeting daytime TV. They're targeting working class. And lotteries can be the same. I'm not going to name any in particular, but they target working class, low social economic areas. And it's our wider jobs to help with the financial literacy, which is, look, okay, some of this is a bit boring, but if you can build wealth very slowly and help yourself out by doing this. And it's all about lifting the lid. So like you said, with match betting, I'm completely against it. I know a lot of people in the money community like it. I'm happy to be different. There's a reason they do it. There's a reason. And even the most sophisticated money blogger who does it as a side hustle, there's 1 in every 10 that then suffer from it. At the moment I'm a bit not happy with the numbers finance app. You pay 80 quid a year and you can win 10,000 euro. I don't like it. I don't like the fact that you're dabbling for gain. It's just something that I think there's something in it. Like, come on, everyone, once in a while someone does well, but the odds are you're not going to. So the point there is, though, stay away. And how do you more easily stay away? You're not exposed to advertising.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura, this has been really interesting. We could have keep on talking about these things for such a long time, but we've got to call it a day. If people do want to find you and your platform online, what are the best places for them to go?
So we spend most of our time on Instagram at Financial, but if you wanted to head to our website at financial.co.uk, you'll find our community where we talk stuff like this all the time. But honestly, Andy, thank you so much for having me on and hearing my soapbox for some of the issues today, some cool stories that have come through the past week. So I think we've had a good one.
Now, if you want to read the articles behind all of those stories that Laura and I discussed from the likes of the BBC, The Guardian, from Which, The Independent, all sorts of different publications, head over to becleverwithyourcash.com/cashchats203. That's where you'll find all of that information. And don't forget, this weekly video you get here on YouTube on a Friday is just one of the 2 episodes I do on my podcast. If you want to listen to the Tuesday episode, then you need to go over to your favorite podcasting app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, you name it. I'll link to it below and above. It's becleverwithyourcash.com/podcast. My name's Andy Webb. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, cheers. And here are a couple more videos you might find interesting.